Hello everyone, Lance here. So today we're gonna have a look at how I retopologize the model. Now when it comes to retopologizing the model, I usually start with the eye. It's not really necessary to start with the eye. You can actually start with, for example, the nose or the mouth or the neck. But for me, I just prefer to start with the eyes because the eyes are the most important part on the face, and I want to make some early decisions on the eyes before extending the mesh onto the other parts of the model. However, later on I will also come back to the eyes and make changes, so the early decisions are not that important. So in any case, currently I am using an add-on called Surface. This add-on came out a long time ago, but ever since Blender 2.8 it became rather buggy, but now I give it another go and I think it's working just fine at this point, but sometimes I do get into some errors, but it's not that much of a big deal and I was able to avoid the errors in the process of retopologizing this particular model. So you see, I am using the annotation to mark out the important face loops and then create the mesh based on the marks. This is only possible because of the Surface add-on. And at some point in the past, Blender made an update that introduced a new shading mode for retopologizing, but it's been forever since I made a new model with a new topology, so I kind of forgot about this new shading mode and I'm currently using the default shading mode, which is not very good. And this was actually how people see the mesh back in the days, and I kinda got used to it, so it doesn't bother me too much. But I think for the new users, I think this does look a little messy, and at some later time I recall the new shading mode and turn it on, but for now just bear it with me. It's not gonna take long before I recall that there is a new shading mode for retopologizing. Right now you probably noticed that the mesh is rather ugly and the vertices are not very well placed. You see, some loops are very big and some loops are very thin, but at this point they don't really matter that much, because at this point I am focusing on the loops themselves, where they go and how to terminate them or how to loop them back to the beginning. And later on I can always smooth out the vertices and make the mesh look a lot more uniform. When you try to focus on developing your topology and you try to make the mesh look clean and beautiful at the same time, you probably will have a hard time because there are too many things to process. So at this stage, just focus on the topology itself rather than the beauty of the mesh. Later on, once the topology is finished, you can then smooth out the vertices and basically make them look more beautiful and uniform or whatever. So normally, to smooth out the vertices, I can just select a bunch of vertices and then smooth them out, and then project them back onto the base sculpting. But later on I used a different technique which is more efficient. So for this technique I just create a shrink wrap modifier and shrink wrap the retopologized mesh onto the base sculpting, and then I go to sculpt mode and smooth out the retopologized mesh. and the shrink wrap modifier will project the vertices back onto the base sculpting. However, the actual position of the vertices are underneath the sculpting, so every now and then you have to duplicate the shrink wrap modifier and apply one of the two to commit the shrink wrap so that the actual position of the vertices are updated. And then you can repeat this process over and over. At this point, I finally recalled that there was a new shading mode for retopologizing, so I just turned it on, and as you can see, the mesh looked way better than before. The ear is a very complicated organ, and so the topology of the ear is also a complicated subject. However, it's only complicated if you want to create it using all quartz, but in reality the ears are not very animated, so you can probably get away with quite a few triangles inside the ears. Now, a lot of you probably want to avoid using triangles by any means necessary, but that's not the case. A lot of professionals out there use triangles all the time, it's just that they know how to use triangles. And since I know how to use triangles, I decided to use a few in the ears. So the purpose of the triangles in this case is to terminate some loops, and the loops that have one side terminated by a triangle will have the other side terminated by another triangle as well. So basically, every time you use a triangle, you have to use another triangle somewhere else to terminate the other end of the loop. So yeah, as a rule of thumb, triangles always come in pairs. That is, unless you have holes or n-gons in your mesh. But assuming that you don't have any holes or n-gons, then every time you use a triangle, you will have to use another triangle somewhere else. If you don't want to use the second triangle, then you will have no choice but to get rid of the first triangle. There is no other way. With that said, if you want to make a mesh using all quartz, Then, as a rule of thumb, whenever you find a hole, you have to count the number of edges of that hole and make sure that the number of edges is even. If a hole has an odd number of edges, then when you fill that hole using all quads, you will end up with at least one triangle and at least one triangle elsewhere outside of the hole. So while you're retopologizing your mesh, whenever you encounter a hole, always make sure that the hole has an even number of edges, and then you can fill in that hole using all quads. And at the end of the day, you will end up with a mesh that has no triangles whatsoever. Now it's time for me to make the topology of the body, and the body is a lot simpler than the face because most of the body movements are very limited, unlike the face with lots and lots of muscles underneath. So for example, the elbow only curve back and forth while the torso maybe curve one direction at a time and then maybe twist a little. So yeah, we don't need to make a lot of complex topology for the body in order for it to animate. However, for this project, I want the topology to follow the overall anatomy of the model so that when the body deforms, I can sculpt some additional corrective shape keys to illustrate the deformation of the muscles. But yeah, you can probably get away with a lot simpler topology like simple horizontal and vertical loops and maybe a few loops on the breasts, and that's it. But for me, I want to follow the anatomy. It's just my personal preference. this point I am starting to create the inside of the mouth. However, remember that I have a shrink wrap modifier in order to relax the vertices. Now this will be a problem if the shrink wrap modifier kind of projects the inside of the mouth all the way back to the lips or other parts of the face. That would be a big problem. So once you create the inside of the mouth, don't forget to create a vertex group and assign the vertices other than the mouth to the vertex group, and then use that vertex group as the limit for the shrink wrap modifier. Otherwise, you will end up projecting the inside of the mouth onto the surface of the base model. At this point, the topology was pretty much done and I was quite happy with how it looks at the end, so I called it a day. The next step in this project is to UV unwrap the model, and that is the subject of the next video. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.